In the bustling city of Cyram, where neon lights flickered and the hum of technology blended with the cries of the street vendors, Kainox stood atop a crumbling rooftop. The wind whipped through her short, black hair, and the chill from the distant mountains mixed with the burning heat of the city below. Cyram was a place of contradictions: advanced technology and decaying infrastructure, endless wealth and bottomless poverty. But it was also where she was born, raised, and forged into what she had become today. Kai's arm, gleaming with metal and powered by state-of-the-art cybernetic enhancements, was the symbol of her survival. Her iron arm wasn't just a tool, it was a living part of her, an extension of her will. It was born out of necessity when her arm was irreparably damaged during a vicious street fight, an incident that led her down a path she had never imagined. Now, her arm was both her greatest weapon and her greatest curse. Her gaze shifted to the horizon. The Grand Ascension tournament was fast approaching, and with it, the only chance she had to face the one person who haunted her every thought: the leader of the Iron Fist Syndicate, Vulcan. Kai. A voice broke through her thoughts. She turned to see her longtime friend and mentor, Lyo Dragon, approaching her from behind. His tall figure cut through the air with purposeful strides, his dark hair swept back, and his sharp eyes filled with concern. "You're still here?" Kai didn't respond immediately, her gaze fixed on the glowing skyline ahead. She wasn't just lost in thought as she was preparing herself. She had been waiting for this moment for years. Lyo took a step closer, sensing the weight of her silence. "The tournament is in 2 weeks. You need to start preparing yourself mentally, not just physically. Vulcan won't be an easy opponent." "I know," Kai replied quietly, her voice carrying an edge of determination. "I've fought countless opponents, but Vulcan isn't just another fighter. He's the reason I'm here. He's the reason I had to become Thieves Broken Bar this thing." Lyo frowned, crossing his arms over his chest. "Don't let that obsession cloud your judgment. The Iron Fist Syndicate may have caused you pain, but you're more than that. You're stronger than just revenge." Kai clenched her fist, the servo motors in her iron arm humming as the muscles in her mechanical limb tensed. "It's not just revenge. It's about proving I'm not some broken child anymore. I will defeat Vulcan, and I will destroy the Syndicate. I'll show them that you can't break someone like me." Lyo sighed, his expression softening. He had been by her side since the beginning, watching her evolve from a child with raw talent into the fierce, unstoppable fighter she was now. But he knew the darkness that lingered inside her, the hunger for vengeance, the desire to prove herself. Kai was consumed by it, and sometimes he feared it would cost her everything. "You've come a long way," Lyo said, his voice a mixture of pride and concern. "But you're not alone in this. You never were." Kai didn't reply. She knew he meant well, but her path had always been solitary. The streets of Cyram had taught her that trust was fragile, and that survival was a game that didn't allow for weakness. And so, she'd learned to rely on herself. Turning back to the horizon, Kai's thoughts wandered to her origins. She wasn't born with the iron arm, though the prosthetic felt like part of her now. It had been the result of an accident, a brutal fight with a rival gang member that left her with nothing but broken bones and a crushed arm. The old Kai had been weak, desperate, and afraid. But the moment she awoke in the medical facility, staring at the gleaming metal that replaced her shattered limb, she knew everything had changed. That was when she met Dr. Lucius Verex, the scientist who had given her the iron arm. Verex was a genius in biomechanical engineering, a man whose obsession with perfection led him to create the most advanced cybernetic limb ever designed. He had offered Kai Adela his enhancements in exchange for her loyalty, for her participation in the underground fighting circuit. At first, she had hesitated, but the prospect of power, of becoming something more than just another street rat, had been too enticing. She agreed, and her life had never been the same. "Are you ready for the trials?" Lyo's voice pulled her back from her thoughts. Kai turned to face him, her expression hard. "I'm ready, but there's something I need to know first." Lyo raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "There's a secret," Kai said, her voice low, barely audible. "Something I've been digging into. I've been trying to find out more about the Iron Fist Syndicate, about Vulcan. There's something about him that doesn't add up." Lyo's face darkened, and he stepped closer. "What do you mean?" Kaya looked into Lyo's eyes, searching for any sign of recognition. "When I was with Dr. Verg's a broken bar, there were things he didn't tell me. I think Vulcan might have played a part in my enhancement. I think he's tied to the technology that created the Iron Arm." Lyo's expression froze, his eyes narrowing. "You're telling me Vulcan is somehow involved with Verex's work?" "I don't know yet," Kaya replied, shaking her head. "But I need to find out. I need to know the truth before the tournament. If Vulcan is responsible for what happened to me, I won't just fight him, I'll destroy him." Lyo hesitated, then sighed. "I know you want answers, but be careful. The Syndicate is dangerous. They've been pulling strings in the shadows for years. If you're not careful, you could get pulled into something you don't fully understand." Kaya met his gaze, her jaw set in determination. "I've come too far to back down now. I won't stop until I get the truth." The days that followed were a blur of training and preparation. Kaya's Iron Arm had become an extension of her body, but her mind was just as sharp. She continued to investigate the mysteries surrounding Vulcan and the Iron Fist Syndicate, scouring old records, tapping into underground data networks, and speaking to former members of the Syndicate who had defected. What she discovered was chilling. Vulcan wasn't just the leader of the Iron Fist Syndicate, he was the one who had engineered her enhancement. Dr. Verex had worked under Vulcan's direction, and Kaya's transformation had been part of a larger, more sinister project. The Syndicate had been experimenting with cybernetic enhancements, using combatants like Kaya as test subjects. Vulcan had been pulling the strings from the shadows, manipulating everything from behind the scenes. But there was more. Kaya's investigation uncovered a startling revelation. Vulcan was not just a man, he was something more. The true identity of Vulcan was a carefully guarded secret, buried deep in the archives of the Syndicate. What Kaya found was a file containing genetic data, medical records, and references to a project known as Project Ironclad, and at the center of it all was a name, Kaya. The file contained her own genetic profile, dating back to her birth. She was not just a random victim of circumstance. Kaya's bloodline was linked to a long-forgotten lineage of warriors, chosen to undergo the enhancement process. Vulcan wasn't just the leader of the Syndicate, he was part of the same genetic experiment, and Kaya's true purpose had always been to face him in combat. Her discovery shattered everything she thought she knew. The desire for vengeance, the need for justice, it all felt meaningless now. She wasn't just a victim of the Syndicate, she was part of their design, a pawn in a game far larger than she had ever imagined. But even in the face of this revelation, Kaya's resolve did not falter. The truth, however painful, only strengthened her will to destroy the Syndicate. She would fight Vulcan not just for herself, but for everyone who had been caught in the Syndicate's web of control and manipulation. The tournament was approaching, and Kaya knew her path was set. The final confrontation was inevitable. She would fight, she would win, and she would destroy the man who had twisted her life. But first, she would have to confront the greatest enemy of all, the truth. The night in Cyram was always alive with the hum of energy, from the blinding lights that bathed the streets in neon to the distant drones that buzzed above the skyline, delivering everything from food to intelligence. Kaya stood on a rooftop, gazing down at the chaos below. The city was full of contradictions, of broken dreams and technological marvels. She had always been part of this paradox, surviving in the cracks, thriving in a world that discarded the weak. But tonight, as the city pulsed beneath her feet, Kaya felt a weight that she couldn't shake, a weight tied to her very origins. She had always known she was different, not just because of her iron arm, but because of what had happened to her when she was a child. Her transformation, her rise from the streets, had never been a simple tale of survival. There was more to it, something hidden beneath the surface, a secret that had eluded her for years. But as the tournament loomed on the horizon, something within her had snapped. The truth was out there, and she would find it. She wasn't alone on the rooftop. Lyo Dragon, her closest friend and mentor, stood beside her, watching the city with a brooding expression. His figure was tall and muscular, with sharp features that were often soft with concern when it came to her. Kaya had grown used to Lyo's worry, but she could tell tonight was different. He knew something was coming, something he couldn't stop, and neither could she. The wind kicked up, and Kai's hair fluttered around her face, momentarily blinding her. She wiped it away, her cybernetic arm glinting in the moonlight. It was sleek, powerful, and elegant, a far cry from the broken limb she had once had. It was the result of a decision she had made in a moment of desperation. But now, it felt like the symbol of something much darker, something she had only just begun to understand. Kaya. Lyo's voice cut through her thoughts, steady but with an edge she recognized. You're digging too deep into this. You're losing yourself in the past. What you need now is focus. The tournament. It's coming, and you can't let this obsession with Vulcan distract you. Kaya's gaze flickered to Lyo, and she saw the concern in his eyes. I'm not obsessed, she said, her voice low but firm. I'm searching for the truth. I need to know what's behind all of this. Why did Verex build me like this? Why was I chosen? And why the hell is Vulcan always one step ahead? Lyo's jaw tightened. He knew Kaya better than anyone else. He knew her drive, her hunger for justice, and her need to prove herself. But he also knew the dangers of the path she was walking. The Syndicate was no ordinary criminal organization. It was a machine, a massive, shadowy empire that controlled everything from politics to the most cutting-edge technology. And Vulcan, the leader of the Syndicate, was no mere man. He was something more, something terrifying. And Kaya was about to uncover a truth that could change everything. I've been following your leads, Kaya continued, her gaze never leaving the skyline. And I've found something, a name, a project. Lyo stiffened. What kind of project? Project Ironclad, Kaya said, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. I found references to it in a data file buried deep within the Syndicate's archives. It's a genetic enhancement project. And I think a broken bar. I think I'm part of it. I think Vulcan is part of it too. Lyo took a step toward her, his expression darkening. This is dangerous, Kaya. The Syndicate has erased most of their records. If you've uncovered something like this, it's only a matter of time before they come for you. Kaya's eyes hardened. They can try. The truth she had uncovered wasn't just about her enhancements. It was about a much larger scheme, one that tied her, Vulcan, and a hidden lineage together in a web of secrets and manipulation. She was part of a larger experiment, a genetic program that had been in motion for decades. The iron arm, the strength it gave her, wasn't the result of random technology. It was part of a greater design, a design that had once been secret, but now, it was all falling into place. Verex had built her iron arm, but he had not done so without a purpose. She had always suspected that there was more to her transformation than just fixing a broken limb, but now she knew that the arm was just a part of something far darker. It was a weapon, and she, Kaya, had been designed to wield it. But Vulcan was the key. He had to be. The hidden lab. Kaya and Lyo had decided to meet with an old contact, a hacker who went by the name of Cypher. He was a former member of the Syndicate, someone who had left after realizing the scale of the organization's manipulation. Cypher had information, and Kaya needed it. They traveled through the underbelly of Cyram, moving through dark alleyways and abandoned corridors, until they reached an old warehouse at the edge of the city. Inside, they found Cypher, a wiry figure with sharp eyes and a face that was half obscured by a hood. Cypher, Kaya said, her voice calm but demanding. I need access to the Syndicate's most recent archives, anything related to Project Ironclad. You have the access codes. Cypher didn't respond immediately. He sized them up, clearly weighing the risk of helping them. The Syndicate was ruthless in its efforts to eliminate any defectors, but then he relented, pulling up a holographic interface on a small device he carried with him. I can help, Cypher said, his fingers dancing across the interface. But you need to understand something. The Syndicate has eyes everywhere. If they catch wind of this, they won't just come after you, they'll come after everyone you care about, including your mentor. Lyo stiffened at the mention of his name, but Kaya remained unflinching. I'm prepared for that. Cypher nodded grimly, his fingers continuing to work. You'll have what you need in a few minutes, but what you'll find a broken bar. It's not what you think. This isn't just about your enhancements. It's about something bigger. You're not the only one. There are others. Ki's pulse quickened. What do you mean? Cypher paused, his eyes narrowing as the data began to flow. You'll see soon enough, but be careful. The truth isn't always what we want it to be. The data unveiled the moment the data came through. Ki's heart raced. The file was massive, filled with genetic sequences, old records, and schematics for cybernetic enhancements that were eerily similar to her own iron arm. She scanned through the files quickly, her mind racing as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Project Ironclad wasn't just about creating stronger fighters. It was a government-backed operation, as something that had started decades ago in secret. The Syndicate had been its cover, a front to hide the true nature of the program. The goal wasn't just to enhance human strength, it was to create an army of superhumans, fighters who could be controlled, manipulated, and deployed as tools of power. And then, there it was, a name that made Ki's blood run cold. Vulcan. The file revealed that Vulcan wasn't simply the leader of the Syndicate, he was the result of the same genetic experimentation that Ki had undergone. He had been engineered to be the perfect leader, strong, intelligent, and ruthlessly calculating. His cybernetic enhancements were a prototype for what they had intended for the entire project. Ki's enhancements, her iron arm, had been a more recent modification to the program, an improvement upon Vulcan's original design. But it wasn't just Vulcan's genetic makeup that tied him to her. It was the truth about their shared past. Ki's family had been involved in the early stages of the project, their bloodlines chosen for a specific reason because they carried the genetic traits needed to survive the enhancements. Ki's own mother had been one of the original test subjects. And her father? He had been the scientist who helped design the project of Vulcan's father. It was a revelation that shook Ki to her core. She wasn't just an experiment, she was part of the very family line that had created the Syndicate's twisted legacy. Her desire for revenge, for justice, had never been about the Syndicate at all. It had been about a family that had betrayed her, a father who had abandoned her to a cruel fate. And now, Ki knew what she had to do. The battle wouldn't just be against Vulcan, it would be against the legacy of her own blood. The final decision, as Ki stared at the data before her, the weight of everything she had uncovered began to settle on her shoulders. The rage inside her had always been fueled by the belief that she was a victim, but now, she saw the truth. She had been part of something much larger than herself, a legacy of power and manipulation. I can't just fight him, Ki muttered, her voice distant, as the realization hit her. I have to destroy everything he represents. Everything. Laios stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. The truth will change you, Ki, but it doesn't have to define you. Ki's eyes narrowed, a fire burning in her chest. It will define everything. The tournament was still days away, but the fight had already begun. Let me know if you'd like to further explore the next stages of Ki's journey or any particular adjustments. The city of Cyram had always been alive via its pulse, synchronized with the hum of technology and the roar of countless lives struggling to survive. But for Ki Inox, as she paced through the shadows of her small, cluttered apartment, it felt as if time itself had slowed down. The truth she had uncovered weighed heavily on her heart and mind. Her search for answers had led her to discover things that threatened everything she had believed in. She stood in front of a mirror, staring at her reflection. The face that stared back at her was familiar, but something was different now. Her eyes, once full of defiance, now gleamed with a mixture of understanding and bitterness. The face in the mirror was the face of someone who had been betrayed, and not just by others, but by her very own blood. Her hands clenched, her iron arm humming as she flexed her fingers. The gleaming metal wasn't just a weapon now, it was the manifestation of her fate. The file's cipher had given her burned into her memory. The truth about Project Ironclad, about Vulcan, and her own genetic origins had shattered her sense of identity. She wasn't just an accident, she was part of a carefully crafted plan, an experiment, a product. And the man who had led it, the man who had manipulated her and countless others, was none other than Vulcan, her bloodline's legacy. Her father's name had haunted her since childhood. As a girl, she had only known him as the mysterious figure who disappeared before she could even understand what he meant to her. Now, That name had become synonymous with everything she hated. Her father hadn't just abandoned her, he had sold her future to the highest bidder. But Vulcan had gone even further. He had taken what her father had started and transformed it into something monstrous. She wasn't the only one who had been subjected to the project. The Syndicate had an army of enhanced soldiers who, like her, were created to follow orders, to be weapons. And now she knew that the tournament wasn't just her chance for glory or revenge, it was her chance to bring an end to the legacy of Project Ironclad. The calm before the storm. 2 weeks had passed since Kai's meeting with Cypher. The city had grown quieter in anticipation of the Grand Ascension tournament. The streets buzzed with rumors, with talk of the competitors, the fights that would take place, and the ultimate champion who would rise above the rest. But for Kai, the tournament had become less about the spectacle and more about her own purpose. The fight she was about to face wasn't just against the best martial artists in the world, it was a confrontation with her own origins, her very identity. Lyo had been patient with her, but she could see the worry in his eyes. He knew what the tournament meant to her, but he also understood that something deeper was at play. She was no longer fighting simply to win. She was fighting for something far more personal, something that had the potential to destroy everything. Kai. Lyo's voice broke through her thoughts. She looked up to see him standing in the doorway of her apartment, his usual stern expression softened by concern. "You're still in here?" "I'm preparing," Kai replied without turning to face him, her focus still on the metallic arm that gleamed before her. She flexed her fingers again, feeling the strength, the raw power beneath the surface. She had grown accustomed to the feeling, to the hum of energy that surged through her every time she moved. But now, it wasn't enough. It wasn't just the physical battle that awaited here, it was the mental and emotional one. She had to confront the truth about her past, her father, and Vulcan. She had to face the demons inside her. Lyo walked over to her, his eyes softening. "I know what you're thinking, but you're not alone in this, Kai. We'll get through it together. Whatever happens in the tournament, it doesn't change who you are." Kai's jaw tightened. "It changes everything, Lyo. I'm not who I thought I was. I'm not just a fighter. I'm a weapon, created by my father's legacy, and controlled by the Syndicate. I have no family, no real past. Everything I knew is a lie." Lyo placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm. "No, Kai, you are not just a product of someone else's design. You are who you choose to be. Your past doesn't define you. The choices you make now do." Kai's eyes flickered with something close to doubt, but she didn't show it. She had always been alone, but now, the weight of the world seemed to bear down on her. "I don't know if I can do this, Lyo. I don't know if I can fight this fight and come out the other side unscathed." "You'll come out stronger than ever," Lyo said. "You've always been strong. You've never needed anyone to tell you who you are." Kai's gaze hardened as she looked at the reflection in the mirror once again. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain: she would destroy the Syndicate, she would fight her father's legacy, and she would tear down everything Vulcan had built. The only question left was how far she was willing to go. The tournament begins. The Grand Ascension tournament had arrived, and the arena was alive with energy. Thousands of spectators packed into the vast stadium, their cheers echoing through the air as competitors from all over the world prepared for the ultimate showdown. The air was thick with anticipation, and Kai could feel it. This was the moment she had been preparing for. But as she stepped into the ring, her mind was not on the crowd or the fighters around her. It was on Vulcan. She could feel his presence, his influence in every corner of the tournament. It wasn't just his name on the line, it was his empire, his legacy. And Kai would bring it all crashing down. The crowd roared as the first fighters entered the ring. Kai stood on the edge of the arena, watching the opening matches with a cold, detached gaze. She didn't care about the others. She didn't care about the spectacle. She only cared about reaching the final match, about facing Vulcan. But she knew that to get there, she would have to defeat some of the world's strongest competitors. The tournament was a brutal gauntlet, and Kai was ready for it. As the first round of fights ended, Kai's name was called. She stepped into the arena, her heart pounding in her chest. The crowd's cheers washed over her, but she tuned them out, focusing on the task ahead. Her opponent, a towering fighter with heavy armor and a reputation for brute strength, was waiting for her. The bell rang. Kai's movements were fluid and precise as she engaged the massive opponent. Her iron arm hummed with power, each strike sending shockwaves through the air. She moved with the grace of a dancer and the speed of a predator. Her opponent's slow, clumsy attacks no match for her agility. With each movement, her confidence grew. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for the truth, for her future. In a blur of motion, Kai delivered a devastating blow to her opponent's chest, sending him crashing to the ground. The crowd erupted into applause, but Kai barely heard them. She was focused on one thing: reaching the final match. The real fight had yet to come. Vulcan's shadow. Back in the shadows of the tournament, Vulcan watched Kai's victory unfold on a holographic display. His dark eyes flickered with interest as the girl fought with skill and precision. She was good. No, she was extraordinary. He had always known that the day would come when she would challenge him, but he had never expected it to be like this. He had followed her rise through the ranks of the underground fighting circuits, watched as she honed her skills, and seen the power of the iron arm for himself. He had designed her. After all, she was part of the family, part of the legacy he had been building for years. And now, she was coming for him. The truth would be revealed soon enough. But Vulcan wasn't worried. He had always been one step ahead of her, always in control. He had built the syndicate, and he had shaped Kai into the weapon she was meant to be. There was no escaping that. As Kai stood victorious in the ring, her eyes scanning the crowd, Vulcan smiled to himself. The time had come for their final confrontation, and he would be waiting. The road ahead. The tournament raged on, each fight bringing Kai closer to her goal. But every step forward felt heavier than the last. She had already lost so much of her past, her family, her sense of identity, and now, the final battle loomed ahead. As the days passed, Kai found herself wrestling with the truth that had been forced upon her. Vulcan was not just an enemy, he was a mirror to everything she had become. Her father's legacy was her own, and she couldn't escape it. But Kai was no longer the girl who had been abandoned by her family. She was no longer the victim of her own design. She was a warrior, and she would fight to destroy everything that stood in her way. The final match was coming, and the fight for her future was about to begin.